Hello, this video project is brought to you by Covan Blair, Madison Mede, Maggie Glenn, and Rachel Maria, as our final for our environmental justice class. Please enjoy our presentation on water protectors and the violence that they face from law enforcement.
The Loyola community occupies the ancestral homelands of the people of the Council of Three Fires, an alliance which formed based on the shared language, similar culture, and common historical background of its three historical members, the Odawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe nations. For Loyola's full land acknowledgements, please see the below link. We understand that this issue is one which prioritizes Native voices, and we intend not to speak over these voices, but to bolster them and share why the issues presented are ones which non-Native Americans should also be cognizant of. Any and all people who care about justice, environmentalism, and human rights will be affected by the consequences of inaction in cases of police and private security violence. Our information has been sourced from Indigenous leaders, but this video is intended to be accessible to anyone, and in that spirit, continuing to share this message further to Native and non-Native allies alike would be sincerely appreciated. On February 1st, 2019, Sissy Thunderhawk filed an amended class action lawsuit in Thunderhawk versus the County of Morton against the District of North Dakota in the wake of numerous civil rights violations occurring during the Standing Rock movement in opposition of the Dakota Access Pipeline. The roads were controlled and barricaded, and bridges were shut down, all as actions which prevented the plaintiffs from exercising their First Amendment right to assemble, speak, and pray in the areas in question, as well as preventing journalists and supporters from being able to move freely. The decision to pursue legal action was just one of many employed by water protectors and Native Americans in the effort of defending their rights to defend their lives and land. In this video, we address the issue of police brutality and the overreach of private security firms against environmental protectors. Specifically, we see how private firms such as Thunderhawk LLC have been actively impeding on people's legal rights. To understand the full length and breadth of this issue, you may first need to understand the history that preceded current protests. Following European colonization efforts in the mid-1500s, the lands of America, which were originally populated by indigenous people, were systematically stolen or coercively ceded to the new governing powers of America. In cases of ceded land, varied degrees of guarantees were afforded to both the people and the land. In the current day, however, various corporate interests have threatened and continue to threaten the sustainability of indigenous peoples' environments. The Dakota Access Pipeline, a 1,172-mile-long underground crude oil pipeline, was constructed through and without the consent of Native Americans and their land, resulting in the No DAPL movement of 2016 in opposition of pipelines within treaty boundaries. Similarly, Enbridge Incorporated has proposed an oil pipeline designated Line 3, intended to produce similar results as the Dakota Access Pipeline and, from the perspective of Native Americans, produce similar consequences if it is to be constructed without their consent. In a similar vein, Stop Line 3 is a movement made to oppose the construction of the pipeline and, most relevant to this discussion, are the steps Enbridge has taken in bolstering law enforcement and private security in order to counter pipeline protests.
Right, thank you so much, Covan, for a little bit of background on the issue. Next, I'm going to talk about private security firms and how they've contributed to continuing pipeline construction. So, privately hired security firms such as Tiger Swan and the Northern Lights Task Force have been working really closely with law enforcement to arrest water protectors at both Standing Rock and Line 3. These security firms are hired by energy partners or energy firms in order to continue pipeline construction. So this is a picture taken at a pipeline protest, and you can see protesters are just standing here peacefully, and they are met with blatant police and military-like action. So that's just a little bit about what privately hired security firms are doing at protests. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Tiger Swan, because Tiger Swan has been exposed for using military-like tactics on protesters that are just exercising their right to dissent. And since they have been exposed for doing that, they have denied all involvement in the issue. In documents that were released by the Intercept in an investigation, it was revealed that Tiger Swan monitored and infiltrated the camps of water protectors. They used tools such as drones, cyber surveillance, hacking, and military-grade equipment to monitor the water protectors even though they weren't doing anything illegal. Tiger Swan also monitored the water protectors' radio communication, and at times would even add their own disruptive messages. So you can see here, this is a picture of Tiger Swan training. You can see it looks very military-like, and 16,000 documents were found pertaining to a partnership formed with Tiger Swan and the energy transfer partners that were at Standing Rock. Then this is another picture taken at a protest. You can see that's a little much. And Tiger Swan used military force that was actually developed in the Middle East to fight terrorists. So the military force that they used on protesters was originally made to fight terrorists in the Middle East. It was not for any kind of protesting. Okay, so the next firm I'm going to talk about is the Northern Lights Task Force, which was in Minnesota at Line 3. So Enbridge was an energy partner involved in the Line 3 construction, and Enbridge paid the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources $2.17 million to protect Line 3. Emails revealed that Enbridge organized training, which involved local sheriffs and FBI agents, and there were also several emails between the company and the Northern Lights Task Force that described these training courses and setting up meetings. And this is a picture from that. So some of the activists that were arrested by the Northern Lights Task Force were held for up to 20 hours without ever being booked and were denied prescription medication as well as denied medical attention for any injuries. The Northern Lights Task Force is funded by Enbridge, which is a key player in the pipeline construction and oil development. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is just attacks on water protectors in general, because security firms that are hired by energy transfer partners are kind of a helping hand to law enforcement, because they were known to do things that law enforcement was not legally allowed to do. So this is another picture of just the blatant military action that was taken to pipeline protesters. These protesters were just protesting, and they were met with excessive force by security firms doing things that law enforcement could not do. And then this is just some of the pictures of protests. These are just water protectors there to protect the water, just as the sign says. And this is what a lot of protests look like. Well, this is what other protests look like. This is a blatant sign that says "We are unharmed. We are unarmed." And this is just an example of some of the action that security firms as well as law enforcement took on these protesters. So yeah, that's a little bit about privately hired security firms and their role in pipeline protester struggles. So next we're going to hear a little bit about the importance and what to do next.
Not only are security firms an issue, but as Covan so graciously informed us earlier, there's lots of disturbances between law enforcement and Native American pipeline protesters. We cannot control security firms without control over the energy firms' funding and the aid that they receive from local law enforcement, making this a really deepened issue. To start, I just want to show this video that makes the viewer question, what do we do when our law and justice enforcement is the one attacking us?
Morton County Sheriff's Department.
Hi, I need to report an assault.
Okay, where did it occur at?
It's happening right now.
Okay. What town?
It's on sacred, it's up at Standing Rock. They're innocent, unarmed people being attacked with water in freezing cold temperatures. Unarmed people. It's happening right now. There are militia-style police firing at point-blank range with high-powered mace on unarmed people. Who protects the people?
Do you know exactly where this is occurring at?
Yep, I can tell you right now. Hold on. It's happening up on the road where the big trucks were set on fire last week.
Okay, so it's on a state highway?
No, the protectors are actually off the state highway, as are the police. It's just beside it. And so right now, as
if there's police there, then it has.
The police are the ones attacking innocent, unarmed people. So what do we do to stop the police that are attacking and harming innocent, unarmed people? Because right now, as I see, we have a high-powered cannon literally hitting people at point-blank range in the face. People can lose eyes. People are going to get hypothermia. People could die. We have elders here. We have children here. We have all ages here. Nobody is armed except for the police. Who protects the people from the police?
Well, I guess if you want to put it up the chain of command, the next person to talk to would be the governor's office.
And in the immediate moment, while people's lives are in danger and being threatened and harmed and violently assaulted by police, who are paid tax dollars by these people, by half of these people, to protect them from them, who do we talk to now to deal with the immediate issue?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I will hold. Find that person.
The fact of the matter is, police brutality against environmental protectors isn't an issue which can be solved by their community alone. And as it relates to the greater issue of environmental justice, all future generations are affected as well. This should not become a politicized or militarized issue, and the politicians, law enforcement, and energy corporations need to know that it is more than Native American communities who stand against these injustices. In an open letter to law enforcement and National Guard in North Dakota by Winona LaDuke, Ann Wright, and Zoltan Grossman from 2016, yes, many of the water protectors are from out of state, but they were invited by the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, with one of the conditions that they don't have weapons. The state of North Dakota has invited out-of-state armed police and unaccountable private security thugs, all to defend a corporation from Texas. Some of the police have come as far as Ohio and Wisconsin. Why is it that armed white militia members from out of state and uninvited are acquitted in Oregon, but invited, unarmed Native people are being criminalized and assaulted in North Dakota? Dakota Access Pipeline protesters were being taken by the numbers, with many being charged with over-exaggerated penalties, like felony theft just for chaining themselves to the pipelines, and some faced terrorism charges, others facing misdemeanors for defending themselves. Popular media sources were lacking in their coverage until the arrest of actress Shailene Woodley. But it's not just the media which underplays the threats against these environmental defenders. Their activism is criminalized in their own states. Anti-protest bills have specifically targeted Native American pipeline protesters in 23 states. Yes, nearly half of the United States have in common that they stand united against First Amendment rights to protest and practice religion. Some protesters were disturbed by police enforcement while in prayer, and many claim that their cultural and religious beliefs were being taken just to fulfill an oil pipeline. As you could see here in this bottom right image, this woman is singing a prayer to an eagle feather as she watches her sacred burial grounds be stepped on and manipulated. Another issue is Indigenous people are targeted worldwide. Killings of land and environmental defenders are most frequent in Latin America and Asia, and reports of these attacks have almost doubled in the past 15 years, from an average of 2 to 4 deaths per week worldwide. These land and water protectors are the last defense against corporations which continue to extract, so the lack of recognition justice digs deeper and becomes an environmental injustice. These Native activists believe in speaking for the unspoken rights of the land, but they are instead stripped away of their own rights by law enforcement who crush that defense of Mother Earth.
Thank you, Rachel, for discussing how protesters are being targeted and why this is such an important issue. We know the background, implementation, and the gravity of the relationship between law enforcement and protesters. This may raise questions of morality. For instance, what actions has the U.S. government taken to rectify their actions and support Natives? Unfortunately, there have been little to no policy changes imposing improvements for protecting against police brutality and filing official misconduct charges for protesters, with many states enforcing anti-protesting laws and lacking police misconduct provisions. Hope for the future may seem grim. Although a recent Supreme Court decision in 2020, McGirt v. Oklahoma, changed the state's role in criminal prosecution on tribal lands if committed by a non-Indian. This court stated that the tribe may continue to have criminal jurisdiction over all the land which was reserved for the Muskogee Creek Nation. In other words, this regained the tribal government's right to administer justice according to their own laws and traditions. This is important because most tribes emphasize a rehabilitative approach and restorative justice measures over punishment. With the Supreme Court's decision, tribal judges and juries are able to decide the fate of those in their tribe accused of a misdemeanor and even sometimes felony-level crimes. As far as violence towards Natives go, the U.S. government has been implementing policies targeting to improve public safety and criminal justice for Indigenous people. In 2021, the U.S. administration admitted to previous executive action not achieving sufficient change against violence towards Indigenous persons. In their efforts to support Native Americans, the administration aims to promote coordination of federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement, including, as appropriate, through the development and support of tribal community response plans. The hope is to increase tribal participation in the Tribal Access Program for National Crime Information, a system that provides tribal access to national crime information systems for federally authorized purposes. In coordination to the Tribal Law and the Order Act of 2010, it called for greater communication and sharing of tribal crime data. And progress has been made in the representation of tribal crime in the national crime statistics, with over 150 tribal law enforcement agencies now submitting uniform crime data to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Until harmful provisions in the police contracts are changed, police officers will continue to operate under a separate system of justice. As a non-Indian, I understand my knowledge and advice may be apparent. Now you may be asking yourself, what can I do? And it can be difficult to find resources to take the first step in supporting Indigenous people. As discussed previously, the most important way to support Natives is to share their story, not to tell it. Sadly, with the current educational standards in place in the U.S., there is little importance on encouraging the teachings of Native Americans. This means we need to educate ourselves and our peers about Indigenous struggles, histories, and cultures in the Americas. This can be achieved through various action plans. First, through land acknowledgement, we must educate ourselves about local Native communities, where you live and where you visit. By following Indigenous environmental and activist groups on social media, you can stay updated on current plans and policies in place. Volunteer humanitarian actions, attend seminars, and intern or participate in a group project for restorative efforts. Support Native-owned businesses and remove all harmful stereotypes and erasure language from vocabulary and correct others. We need to get their message out there. All in it together, we rely on the same air, water, and land. Media representation claims that environmental justice issues are only an Indian issue. There is a dire need for accurate representation of protests on the ground, Native American accounts, and the dangers of police brutality. And of course, supporting Indigenous people in their fight to protect the land and their territories and the environment from destruction, extractive projects, and policies can be achieved through researching Native American policies and calls for action, donating critical supplies like goggles, milk of magnesia, and earplugs. Lastly, if you plan to participate in a protest, please learn your rights and educate yourself on the state's anti-protesting laws. By listening to firsthand accounts from Indigenous communities, we can educate ourselves on the structural discrimination towards and the intentional elimination of Native tribes. In terms of activism, it is better to be proactive than reactive. We must prepare advocacy programs to develop a protocol of activism projects and stay updated through press releases, radio announcements, and Facebook alerts. From what we have covered in this video, one of the most critical tools for an activist is their knowledge of their constitutional rights to protest, practice religion, and have clean water. When speaking to law enforcement and other agencies, one should document their conversations by journal, video, or live stream to ensure their safety. Always buddy up for safety. Pack a bag with essentials, including water, face masks for protecting identity, hat or sunglasses, snacks, you will most likely be there for a long day, and black clothing. This is to blend in with the crowd and have solidarity among protesters. When encountering law enforcement at a protest, do not attempt to throw anything over the barrier. This is a typical action of infiltrators, an attempt for police response with violence. If you see a protester participating in similar actions, be cognizant or inform them of the possible dangers. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and I hope you learned some valuable information and share on the message. Now, let's keep this in mind before you go. Learn your rights and educate yourself using Indigenous resources, especially if you plan to participate in a protest for land and water protection. As Decorah Hawk says, share our story, don't tell it.